In this segment, we're going to focus on regulation, compliance, and industry challenges. Chris, with each state having its own cannabis regulations, how does Keisha Labs navigate compliance across multiple markets?
That's a great question. So the technology that we built, the software, our LIMS system, our laboratory information management system, really has been a staple for us in order to creating framework around the different regulations by market. A lot of the off-the-shelf solutions don't offer that kind of diversification. Everything would have to kind of be built out based on that unique state. So we're able to take APIs into our equipment and move into different markets and expand our footprint and easily integrate the regulations from the state. Really, it takes maybe 30 minutes to kind of set it up in the system, and essentially that becomes an automated process from there on out.
And pardon me, what API is?
So API would essentially be the way either our seed to sale, metric, BioTrack, those systems are communicating into our tool, and that's everything from like a seed to sale system is what we call it. So it integrates into that, and then we integrate into the software of the equipment that does the reading of the chromatography and the analytical work portion of the test itself.
Yeah, essentially it's a key that reads and feeds information, right?
Exactly right. It sends information both ways, absolutely. Yeah.
So have you encountered companies trying to cut corners or bypass testing regulations, and how do you ensure integrity in the industry?
Yeah, I think our what we noticed, there's a lot of news surrounding what's kind of going on in our industry, and it's definitely a challenge for us, right? We can only facilitate so much as the testing, but the ethics of the operators, is unfortunately out of our control. We spend a lot of time with our teams communicating to our customers best practices, constantly offering advice on ways to mitigate certain challenges they have, whether they're environmental or microbial challenges. If they're looking at increasing potency levels or terpenes, we really add value through the data sets that we have available to us through our software, and we really are a data leading operator in terms of you can tell me everything that you want to tell me, but seeing it is believing it, right? So when a sample fails for micro and you can show the customer a plate with multiple colonies on it, that's different than saying, hey, I sent it off to a piece of equipment and the result that came back, was not in your favor, right? And it's more of a conversation. Seeing the actual plates is very telling for the customers, for sure.
What are the biggest challenges cannabis testing labs face when working across different regulatory environments?
I think it's really the enforcement by the regulators, right? In some states you have under-regulation where they're not involved, and then in other states you have over-regulation where they're overstepping kind of their framework of what they're able to do or within their scope. So I think that's a big challenge, and that, in markets where it's, not as tight, you have a series of labs that tend to cut corners. So I would say that it's not so much the operators most of the time. I think it's the labs understanding that they entered a space that is very expensive to operate these labs, and you have one customer who's spending 40, 50 grand a month with you, and all of a sudden you lose that customer, and it puts a huge detriment in the cash flow of the business. And I think to keep these businesses alive, then you open up Pandora's box to maybe looking at shady practices or looking the other way when things, don't look in favor for the customer. Unfortunately for us, fortunately for us, we don't really see that, right? We're working with more sophisticated operators who want to put out good product, who are taking advice from us and using the data to add value. So, that for us is honestly, the biggest value add, being able to kind of show them the data and work off of that.
What state's the toughest to work in?
I would say,
or the most stringent?
I would say the toughest state to work in for us at the time was probably California. I think when we entered the market, all the flower was over like, high 30, mid to high 30s, 40s, and it was kind of hard for us to compete in that market, right? We either looked the other way like a lot of the labs did, and I'm not speaking for all of them, right? But, there was obviously a lot of corrupt labs in California, and I still think there's 30 or 40 labs in the state, and everybody's trying to feed off of a small pool of business, and, that's probably a breeding ground for labs that are going to cut corners. And another thing too, they just drop the price, right? They go to $100, $200, for a test, and not really recognizing that if they don't have the volume, they can't sustain that kind of price point. So I would say California for sure was one of our bigger challenges.
Going to that point where you just said the testing being up in the mid 30s and all that, what do you think is a realistic high score?
I would say 10,000 mile high view from what I see in the states that we're in. I would say most of the products in mid 20s to the higher end of the 20s. You still have these low 31s, 32s that pop here and there. You have some genetics that do really, really well. But the vast majority of the product that's being grown is somewhere in that mid 20s. You still have your low 20s and your high teens, that come across depending on, the operator and the genetics that they have that they're working with. But I would say historically it's probably somewhere in that mid 25 to 27, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, because I don't know about you, like when I see product and I see a super high THC score, I'm skeptical about how real that is. Because I mean, you think about the breakdown of the plant. There's some waste. There's 30% THC. There's 10%, terpenes. How much is what's the cutoff realistically for a THC score?
No, I think to be honest with you, to add to that, the variability of the plant itself. You can take different buds from different areas of the plant and have all different results, right? So it's not where you can just sample.
Right, different from the cola than the larf at the bottom.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's really, are they big nugs, are they small nugs? So there's, all this variability, and I think that's where we continue harping on technology, right, to help us provide visibility into what's going on. Using language learning models and predictive analytics, we can really hone a lot of that in to get better insights into what's going on in these cultivation facilities.
Is there a point where the potency of the product starts to diminish the terpene profile?
I think you kind of see everything across the board, right, in terms of scope. But I think the reality is the consumer and the operators are starting to educate in terms of, it doesn't necessarily have to be a high 30s, to have a good smoke or a good experience. You are seeing a lot of products in the high teens and the mid teens with a good terp profile, and people are really enjoying that experience. I always leave it with the analogy, when you go sit in a restaurant, you don't go and ask the bartender for the wine list and go, give me the highest, alcohol per volume in the bottle, right? You're looking for the best taste, and it's more
the experience.
It's more of an experience. So I think we're on our way there, but I still think we have ways to go, because, you go to Las Vegas and they're not over there looking to consume, a 16 with a nice terp profile. They're like, we're here for 3 days. Yeah. we want to have a good time, right? I want to be on another planet, right?
So what impact does the lack of federal legalization have on testing and compliance within the industry?
I think the inconsistency on how we approach samples from lab to lab. I believe there's good groups out there who are, legislative groups that are representatives of multiple states that are working together in a platform where they're able to speak as a unit to the FDA and to the FDA, to the FDA and to the DEA, and really try to bring some type of standardization to the space.
Understood.